Greetings, race community. Brent coming in live with today's guest, Peter Wilch, who serves as Senior Vice President for University Advancement at Loyola Marymount University. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Brent. Great to be here.
Well, I've been looking forward to this conversation, and I will kick off as I often do. Take me back to junior year of high school. Who was that Peter? What was he into? And which of your eight older brothers or sisters was your favorite? And then how did you end up going to Cornell College?
Well, junior in high school, I grew up in Iowa, which we have that in common, Brent. So I grew up in a small town, Mount Vernon, Iowa, youngest of nine kids. I went to a high school that only had maybe, we'll say probably when I was there, about 320 students in total, about 80 in my class. So as happens in small town Iowa, you participate in everything. So I ran cross country, I sang in the choir, I was in student government, all of those variety of things, and played basketball, you name it. So, but growing up in small town Iowa, youngest of nine kids, there's a 20-year age span between the oldest and I am the youngest. And so when I think of my older siblings, there were a few that probably stood out a little bit more, but kind of collectively, what I would say about my family is that they're all strongly independent folks who pursue the thing that they're most interested in. And so I ended up following one of my brothers to Cornell College in Iowa. My brother Dan had graduated from Cornell about 10, 12 years before I did. And what drew me there was there was some proximity and familiarity, certainly with the school. But to be honest, in our family, we had a family tragedy in that one of my siblings had passed away. And so I ended up staying in town to be close to my mom and dad and to kind of help out with that bridge as they were going through some things with one of my siblings passing away. All that being said, I had an incredible experience at Cornell College, absolutely transformative. In the ways that you would hope, that we all hope, and within higher education that happens for the student, in that I was very seen by my faculty, I was challenged, and I grew a lot as a person, found things I didn't know I was interested in, and it transformed my life and the trajectory that I've gone on since college. And, not only youngest of nine kids, Brent, but my mom and dad didn't go to college. So that's also part of my journey. And higher education has been a difference maker for me, and I've been trying to pay it forward since.
I love it, Peter. It's so inspiring, and yeah, fellow first gen college student, and it's amazing to hear so many versions of what you just shared, and I think it represents the best of what higher ed has contributed to this world. And thank you for sharing. And that being said, I'm curious. Given the background you shared, one of nine kids, parents didn't go to college. When did philanthropy get on your radar as a career path, for example? Because my understanding is you joined the sector by way of your alma mater. So just when did it kind of get on your radar?
Yeah, so in addition, Brent, I'm kind of an interesting path. I was a non-traditional student in some ways, in that I was married as an undergraduate. So as an undergrad, I was working three jobs, including unloading airplanes as a Teamster for UPS. So if you can believe that, at 2 o'clock in the morning, that was not a long lasting job. But what ultimately led me into this, when I graduated, I needed to find a job right away, and I went to work in a brokerage firm and kind of doing back office brokerage and insurance and securities and a whole host of things. Eventually, I kind of learned that the operations path wasn't quite the right fit for me, and I then went kind of out front and again began to work in brokerage and financial planning, financial services. So along the way, I made a call on the then vice president at my alma mater, Terry Gibson, and not quite knowing how endowments and other things worked, I innocently asked if, not only would he be interested in perhaps doing business with me, but if there'd be some way that I could help Cornell in managing some of their investments. And he very, very nicely, to a 25-year-old, kind of explained exactly how endowments work, and that while I was a retail broker kind of working with the individuals, that it might be a bridge too far. He pivoted the conversation at that point in time and asked about my undergraduate experience, as a really good development person might do. And in that moment in time, he said, we do have an opening for a development officer position if you'd like to maybe consider that, because it sounds like you had a transformative experience and this is a way to pay it forward. And so I went to work for Cornell and kind of
I
from there.
love it.
Yeah, yeah.
I love it. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people, and nobody has shared a path like you just did. So you're trying to secure some business as a junior financial professional, and he flipped the script real quick.
He did. He did. And a wonderful, wonderful experience. I essentially doing leadership annual giving efforts. I had several regions of the country that I covered, and I by virtue of that gained familiarity with California and really kind of fell in love with California, which is where I ended up eventually. So
That's amazing. So tell me more about the day in the life in that role when you think back to the early career representing Cornell, hitting the road, and maybe contrasting it a little bit with what it was like in the financial brokerage world that you started in.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it was interesting that I would say, I mean, this might be a little bit like fingernails on a chalkboard to some in higher education, but there was a lot of sales training and other things that went into kind of the brokerage side of things and the insurance side of things. And those skill sets, which were centered on active listening and really meeting people where they were at, getting more familiarized, were very transferable. The thing that was different is that obviously we're focusing much more on altruistic acts and impact through a gift to an institution as opposed to self-benefit through investment growth. And for me, I was successful in the financial services area, but it felt a bit more like a treadmill in kind of the approach, and I didn't quite see the same impact that I had hoped for, had wanted from a career. And so it felt to me like as I was looking ahead, this might be the same thing that I'd be doing again and again and again, as opposed to higher education when I got into it. A day in the life. I'm as a junior gift officer, the most junior gift officer on the team. I had probably 275 prospects because it was a much heavier portfolio load than maybe we carry today. When you think of kind of your retail, if you will, I'm going to use that term, gift officer. But no, I traveled throughout the country. I had very prescriptive goals that were set on overall participation among my managed prospects, upgrades, retention, all the things that you might expect to see. And for me, it gave me broad access to different people from different walks of life. It allowed me to kind of use the skill set that I had built. And by virtue of, doing the leadership gift officer work, I was on the road probably, I would say 3 nights, 4 days, every other week. And because Cornell is in the middle of the country, not the one in Ithaca, but the one in Iowa, I was on an airplane every other week or driving every other week. So you think of a 5 mile drive distance from eastern Iowa, which would be the Twin Cities, Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, and just around Iowa. So, but it was great work. I learned a lot in the process. Probably, the beginning of becoming an expert traveler, which I think I'm pretty good at still, by virtue of the profession. But incredible. And one of the things that stands out, I remember as a 27, 28-year-old gift officer, I remember the first $5,000 gift I closed and I was over the moon about it, and now it makes me smile, but it also reminds me when I mentor other people, when they have the opportunity to work on something, with their own, if you will, with self-efficacy and with agency, what a reward that is.
Tell me more about the $5,000 gift if you recall it.
Yeah, yeah. I was visiting with, and I'll even tell you his name, a 1950 graduate from Cornell College, who is just getting ready to celebrate his 50th reunion. So this is, about 1999. And the donor's name was Walter Crow. He was a retired accountant, CPA in Cleveland, Ohio. He had been visited for years and years and years. And this was it was a recognition gift for a milestone reunion. And he then came back for the reunion and was over the moon about what he had done from an impact standpoint, felt a sense of connection, both with his classmates and with the place, but also, I would say a little bit probably with me. And I understood at that point in time, I was a conduit. I mean, I wasn't the main attraction, certainly. But for me, it was really exciting. And, I continue to find a lot of excitement when I can work with someone where they see something meaningful in their life and have an opportunity to express their desire for impact through generosity.
I love it, Peter. I mean, the fact that you've got such a clear memory of that specific instance, it's really telling. And at the same time, let me just ask you, when you reference fingernails on a chalkboard, why do you think that is? Why are people so uncomfortable with that concept of sales training? Because what you described sounds a lot like great development work to me.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes people might view sales as a point of manipulation, as opposed to kind of the good work when we think about the work that we'll do in a nonprofit sector. And to separate it out, Brent, I really just view it as a process. And it's kind of understanding where you're at in the arc of relationship with others and to be able to ask intentional questions in a respectful way, not in a manipulative way, that help folks kind of understand their own priorities. And obviously, you're coming into a situation with the institutional goals in mind, certainly, and trying to find kind of a healthy match. And sometimes you'll find that the match isn't there. And and that's part of that journey too. But from my standpoint, I think sometimes when people hear kind of the more intentionality, I think it's probably less true today than it was 25 years ago when I started in the field, because I think there's a little bit more sophistication in how we go about preparing gift officers to do their work and preparing alumni professionals and others to do their work. But I know sometimes there can be some tension, you know. I think
Yeah.
the most important thing is, you proceed with a strong moral compass, and good results happen both ways.
Yeah. No, very well said. And I think, look, I think the best sales experiences as well are similar. It's consultative and it's objective. And obviously people have a goal, right? Development officers have a goal of wanting to secure the gift, but there's also that balance of finding the right match, finding the right fit. And I'm sure you've had plenty of situations in your career where you've had to acknowledge that even if the capacity is there and you felt, really promising about the potential, that sometimes it just doesn't end up being the mutual fit in the way that you think.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and
So
I think that's an okay outcome, to be honest.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So it's one thing to represent your alma mater. It's another thing to commit to becoming a professional fundraiser. And you made the move to Grinnell College and then the University of Iowa. And just tell me about what you learned sort of maybe out of the nest of Cornell at those institutions.
Yeah, it was really valuable to go to Grinnell and that I had to learn another institution and to learn it deeply. I had a great uncle who had been a faculty member there and a great aunt who, when I moved to town, was 99 years old. Well, actually, no, as I think about this, no, Brent, she was actually 103. And so you kind of get a sense of this. But what I would say is putting yourself in the shoes of another institution, and really learning the core values, the stories, the traditions, what resonates with the institution. It really requires a lot, and you have a different relationship than the personal experience you have. And I think it's incredibly important. At that point in time, it was when I first realized that as differentiating from Cornell, it wasn't about me. I was a conduit, and I really had to be a strong connection for the alumni back to the institution. Grinnell College, very interesting place to work, in that they have a very significant endowment, which was aided by both generosity and through investment. It honed my skills in being able to ask for impactful gifts that would differentiate from existing revenue streams. And one of those being, when you have at the time I was there, I think a $1.2 billion endowment. I think it's closer to $2 billion now. That really was impactful in thinking about how you connect people back to the mission and demonstrate need and opportunity for impact. I would say, I learned a lot in that environment doing major gift work. When I went to the University of Iowa, that was the most transformative experience for me. It was almost like going to graduate school. My counterparts, several of whom are now vice presidents. I know Floyd Akins has been on this before. He was 2 doors, 3 doors down from me at the foundation. Kevin Collins, his brother Chris Collins, who's at Vanderbilt, Andrew Sheehy, who's at Tennessee, Aaron Monet, who was the VP at DePaul. We were all kind of in a row. And the thing I really appreciated there, one of my mentors was my boss, a guy named Rich Retman, who's now been retired from the University of Iowa Foundation for some time. You know, it was really centered on solid planning, a good, earnest, straightforward approach, focusing on with intentionality on the right parts of portfolio and executing. It was a place where there was healthy competition, and I still think of Jeff Lieberman, who's a good friend, who's still there and just a superstar in advancement circles, and a leader within Case. So many good people. And these are people I still count as friends. This is, I haven't worked at Iowa since 2006. Lynette Marshall arrived maybe 2 weeks before I left to become the vice president at Cornell. So I had a little bit of overlap with her. I had the opportunity to work with Michael New, who passed away, unfortunately, while I was there, but just an incredible team. And I work for the law school too. So I was working with sophisticated donors and with a school where there was expectation for productivity. And it was a lot of fun. I learned
it's amazing. Like you were there for a couple of years, but for it to be that, transformational is super, it's inspiring to hear you talk the way you're talking about it. When you describe healthy competition, what does that mean?
Well, it would mean that as a major gift team, for instance, we were kind of broken into two areas, and medicine was kind of in health sciences. They were one team, and then the rest of the colleges, schools, and athletics were the other team of major gift officers. The regional gift team and the planned giving team would kind of go back and forth between those two, but we were all cheering for one another and shooting for productivity numbers, as far as number of visits, yield on asks, everything. I mean, everything was put forward in a very transparent fashion. And I can tell you, probably, I still remember going into the reports to see where I stood relative to my peers on the asks and the revenue, the visits per month. I was very proud at the time. And as I look at this now, my gift officers here don't always believe me, but the dean and I actually averaged 18 visits per month together. And so,
So how'd
yeah.
you do that? And why is that uncommon? Why can't that be the standard?
Well, I think things have changed and evolved a little bit. There's different ways to capture meetings, and obviously we're having a great conversation today. But these were in that point in time, Brent, we were flying all over the country, and seeing people. And I think, some of it was we have a little bit more refinement today, maybe than we did then, to know exactly if we are in the right forest or not. So there's probably a little bit more trial and error. So that's a little bit different. But I would say, the biggest value for that for me was just having the FaceTime with the dean. We shared a heartbeat by the time we had spent that much time together, and it was incredibly rewarding. Today, and I think of a place like Loyola Marymount, we have 7 schools and colleges, Division I athletics, and other advancement functions across the university. And oftentimes the advancement person can be pulled in a lot of different directions, when they're working with the dean. And that's kind of some of the model that I inherited. And it's an important part of the culture here too. But I really like if we can create an environment, and I think of the Iowa environment as having had this, Brent. I always aspire to have the gift officers somewhat unfettered, if you will.
Yeah, so
They're
like
focused.
fundraisers are fundraisers, and that is what they're doing. And if they're not doing that, really question it.
Yep.
I love it. Tell me about the move back to the alma mater and being in the vice president seat for the first time.
Yeah, well, and it was, I joined Cornell as the vice president in 2006. They had gone through the initial stages of campaign, and I mentioned Rich Retman as a mentor at Iowa. A second mentor is Terry Gibson, and Terry was the VP that pitched me on the idea of joining Cornell some 6 years before I came back as the vice president. Terry continued on as a senior vice president for about 18 months. So it was kind of a bridge and mentor for me as I was a new vice president in the role before he retired. But one of the things that had happened is in the early time of the campaign, Brent, this is as happens sometimes in advancement, several of the donors had come forward and made generous gifts, but they were making, $500,000 and $1 million gifts when they could be making $5 million gifts. So one of the first things that Terry and I engaged in, and we were working with Ben Swaley and a retired partner there, Jim Daniel, and we had to go back out and renegotiate gifts upwards. And
Tell me
so,
more about that. And how do you approach that? And it's sort of like you're in the meeting and it's the donor preempts you and makes the gift before you make the ask.
Yep.
And it didn't have enough zeros.
Yeah, and Brent, it wasn't, these gifts were not quite go away gifts, which was, I would say the super preemptive gift, because they were trustees. and really it was an education process on the campaign. And it was, if we aspire to raise $90 million in the campaign, which is what the campaign was at Cornell, here's what a gift table looks like. And let me just give you a better sense of the universe of donors that we're working with right now and where you fall in that universe.
Yeah.
And so, we know that we're going to be asking for a stretch gift. We know what the aspirations are in this campaign. And so we're coming back to you to have another conversation about the gift that you've made, which we're grateful for. But we'd like you to consider a gift of, in one instance, I think $500,000 to $5 million. And we've got several of these gifts, Brent. I mean, the campaign ended up finishing at $106 million. And we went through the mortgage crisis of fiscal 9 and wrapped up in 10. But it was kind of a baptism by fire,
But it sounds like by being transparent with the donors about the goal and how you envision them fitting into the pursuit of that goal, it was a really collaborative discussion.
Absolutely. It was very collaborative. It brought the board along in a really meaningful way. Our campaign chair there, who was then chair of the board, it was John Smith, who is the CEO of CRST. If you see trucks around the country with the gold cab and the white trailer with black lettering, that is the chair of that board, or was the chair of the board when I was there. I think the other thing, Brent, is kind of the go forward. So we got into a position of being grateful for the gifts that came in. But when I got to the University of San Francisco and then Loyola Marymount thereafter, I became very clear on people understanding where they were at in the arc of the universe of potential donors, so that expectation could be set as partners. And these are key volunteers that have a lot vested in their relationship with the institution and the success of that institution. And I feel like it's an obligation of an advancement person to make sure that, when you're inviting someone into leadership, that they've got clarity on what that means. And that also, so it's expectation setting. And for me, I was a 33-year-old vice president, which is, as I'm thinking about it, kind of insane. But I learned a lot in the nearly 6 years that I was at Cornell. And it's been important in my work after the fact. And I think the big part of this is it's not only that, but it's just the soundness of structures, kind of thinking what the sophistication of a large endowment from Grinnell, the soundness of structures at Iowa, the preparation of volunteers at Cornell. And it's a really important thing when I think about how to lead a team.
So it's one thing to have exposure and travel a bunch of places, but it's a big move to go to San Francisco. And so when did the opportunity at USF surface, and was it a difficult move?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So our campaign had wrapped up at Cornell. And as I'm thinking about this in 2010, we'd gone through a presidential transition at Cornell. And so we were kind of in a space of an interim had come in and then the permanent president had come in. We were between campaigns, about to begin the planning process at Cornell. And so as I was evaluating things and what was fair for the institution, it seemed that both for myself and the institution, it was a time that it would be a worthwhile thing to take a look and scan the horizon. I was contacted by the search firm for the University of San Francisco, and I'm not quite certain how they got my name in Iowa, but nonetheless, I thought, well, I'll take the call. Always curious, I'll take the call. And kind of through a discernment process over the holiday break. And I think the application was probably submitted something like December 28th, December 29th of 2011, entered into the process. And what really drew me to the University of San Francisco was I had done a lot of work for Iowa, for Grinnell, for Cornell in Northern California. So I had some familiarity with the Bay Area, and that was very attractive to me. But it was the ability to work on a larger stage in a more sophisticated environment. And San Francisco is a sophisticated philanthropic environment, since I know everyone in the country seems to fundraise there. But it was an opportunity also for me to lean into the things that are important to me personally, which I was, a beneficiary of access. I'm from a large Catholic family, so I'll just go ahead and put that on the table as the youngest of 9 kids. the Jesuit mission and the intellectual rigor that the Jesuits deploy in their mission and in their work, the 500-year tradition of higher education they've been engaged in, all of it was very attractive.
Yeah.
And so I was given an opportunity to come in and build a team, and I went for it, and it was great.
And so when you think about the before and after, that was a really long run, almost 9 years. You did a lot. Just tell me about kind of what you reflect on most proudly.
Yeah. Well, when I arrived at USF, they were raising maybe 15, $16 million a year on their run rate. Great partnerships with the trustees, with the president, Steve Prevet, current president, Paul Fitzgerald, who's about to retire. I think the big takeaway was in building a team, the importance of partnership with the governing board, with university leadership. I had great working relationship with the CFO there as well. And I think kind of thinking about the peers, the other part of this, I would say, Brent, when you're in a place like Cornell College, you can be a little bit more, if you will, a one-man band in some ways, in that everything has to run through you.
Yeah.
As a leader, I learned with a bigger team, and when I arrived, we had about 40 people, and we grew the team to about 75
Wow.
in the space of about 2.5 years. I just couldn't be all places all the time. And I know, great, executive coaches will talk about the importance of delegating and the importance of empowering others. I was resistant to it because I'm a little bit of a control freak. But the reality is I became a lot more free in the work that I was able to do with principal gifts when I surrounded myself with great peers. And I had an incredible executive team at USF. I learned the value of really empowering others to lead and to learn in that process, that it's okay to make mistakes. And I'm thinking of the executive team that I had, at one point in time, I had 5 AVPs. I think 4 of them are sitting VPs for development now. So
Wow.
I had just a phenomenal team. The environment was great, and we accomplished a lot. I mean, we grew revenues from that 15 to 16 million. In my last years, we were at about 50 million. And they have sustained that level beyond my time there, and which has made me very happy to see that it continues on.
And when you take a step back and just think about high level, same constituency, right? Same geography. Obviously, markets and things evolve, but like, what is the difference between 15 and 50 on a run rate basis? Like, what are the 1, 2, or 3 things that just are the difference maker because it's the same community?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Brent, because what some of the big things that happened there and some of the big things that happened here were consistent. So if we're going to go back office, so I kind of think about it as there's infrastructure, there's engagement, and there's revenue. And it's a little bit more complicated than that, more nuanced. But on the infrastructure side, we went through a database conversion, and we ended up the system that we went with was much more sophisticated in helping us to visualize data and organize ourselves. So that was a really important thing. I would say on the engagement side, Jay Dillon was our director of alumni, and I think you probably know Jay, who's at Cal Berkeley, and I just love everything he's doing. He's super analytical in his approach to everything. I still have his doctoral dissertation, which he gave me a copy of, which was about, you'll have to look it up. I'll leave it at that. It would be of interest to advancement folks. I think that really being intentional about knowing our data, knowing our constituency. And then I think finally, when you look at the revenue side, that third leg of the stool,
Yeah.
we got some large gifts from people who had been part of our constituency forever that had not made insignificant gifts. I mean, they'd been making between $25,000 and $100,000 gifts annually, but they stepped up. In one instance, a donor went from 25,000 to 100,000 to 2.5 million to 5 million to 15 million. And as I understand it, the University of San Francisco will be announcing a very, very large gift from this person in the months ahead. And so that's one instance. We're adjacent to Silicon Valley. USF hadn't thought about itself as being, I don't know if it was being worthy or confidence or what have you, but hadn't really gone into the spaces where some of the philanthropy 50 reside. And we went ahead and said, well, we have nothing to lose. And so we did identify kind of right for us, but then centered on right story and right work. And in San Francisco, a place to make a big impact, a slightly different kind of an institution. And we invited in folks. And I mean, I'll talk about one because it's been publicly bantered about. But John Sobrato, I mean, just an incredible person, incredibly generous person. And he made a big investment in the university. He gave the university great advice when it thought about housing and other things like that, which wasn't a gift, but it was a gift in another way. But again, that relationship began with Paul Fitzgerald, the president, having a pathway and then just going ahead and doing the good work. And I think it's been really rewarding for the Sobrato family as well.
I love it. And so it sounds like maybe similar playbook when you think about infrastructure engagement revenue at LMU. How are you approaching that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Brent, the similarity is in kind of the process and gathering information. The outcomes here are different because Loyola Marymount is in a different geographic location and has a different constituency than USF, although they are both Jesuit institutions.
Yep.
Definitely. But I would say, for us here, and I think when I got here, I met with every single member of the team for an hour. And I heard their story about the institution, what was important, what their concerns were, what motivated them, what they had hopes for. And, I learned a lot from a baseline standpoint about how the institution was functioning well and how we could function better. I did the same thing, kind of concentric circles, started with the team and then the leadership and then the trustees and board members and then donors and kind of, went out from there. And obviously the faculty were peppered in there as well, as were deans. I think the big thing for LMU has been, though, LMU is raising probably close to $40 million a year, and now we're raising between $75 and $80 million a year after 3-4 years into this mix. And I think for us, I mean, we got a very significant gift from the Levy Foundation, which was a $25 million gift, a challenge gift for our engineering building. And we had a strong year at $73 million the year prior to this gift coming in. This gift, I think, gave the team a little bit more confidence in our ability and our sense of belonging. And I would say what I've seen from the gift officers across the board is a higher level of seriousness, productivity, and just general results. The process has improved throughout, and there's more confidence in the work that we're doing. And I think an expectation that this is the quality of work that we're going to do. The Levy gift came in last April. And since that time, a $25 million challenge, which we had, I think, 18 months to meet. We're at about $16 million on the challenge right now. Our fiscal year this year, we're 6 months in. We've already surpassed, or we're about to surpass $40 million, which was the baseline that we had that was here when I arrived. And it's, by the way, it's not me in every gift conversation. This is all the gift officers involved, all the schools, the colleges, the athletic department. It's been really rewarding to watch.
And it sounds like momentum is building momentum.
That's right. That's right.
How do you, I guess, take something like the $25 million gift experience you're just describing and make that a win for the whole team?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. When we look at the Levy gift, I think part of it is, a win for the whole team is kind of to explain the process. The Levy family has been connected with the university for 70 years, and they have been generous for decades. They were involved with Marymount College and Loyola University before they were Loyola Marymount. And, so I think part of it is we have the chancellor of the university is the retired president of Santa Clara. He is a Jesuit. He worked very closely with the Levy family at Santa Clara. He knows the Levy family well because he's an Angelino. And I think some of this, Brent, when we think of how do we make this a win for the team, is that it's not one person who closed the gift. It's a collective effort. It's the work of the sisters and the fathers, the great folks that had done advancement work over a period of years. And kind of the evolution of the gift, and we kind of think about this, it's not one person, it's many of us. And I think when we look at this, and I will talk about this, everyone animates mission from whatever seat they sit in, and the title is not the most important thing. The title you hold is not the most important thing, but it's how you show up and how you greet and meet the people that you work with and your colleagues. And so, I mean, we really celebrated this as a collective win. It's not that Peter Wilch went and did this, that, or the other thing, because I just happened to be the person who the baton was handed to as the leader, but it's the work of so many others before us. And I think telling that story is a really important part of advancement. And it's also one of the great joys in advancement that we get to be terrific emissaries, not only for the university, but for the past work that others have done before us. And there's a lot of good work that's happened.
No, it's amazing. I mean, so many of the examples you've shared in this short discussion really link to a lifelong relationship. And I think that's one thing that's maybe contrasting relative to your time in the brokerage space that a lot of retail or commercial businesses deal with is you've got sort of this point in time where the customer or the business need aligns with your offering, and it could happen young in life or old in life or somewhere in between. But this business of philanthropy really can be from cradle to grave, and I think that is part of what makes it so rewarding. But it also makes it really challenging because you've got to balance the amount of time you spend and the limited resources on the principal gifts of today versus planting the seeds that will grow 70 years from now. And I know that's an area of constant debate and tension.
Absolutely. And the one thing that's interesting in all of this though, Brent, I would say, and I'm not going to go into, you know, the what one might think and what's right, wrong, or otherwise about what one might think about presidential races and things like this. But if you think of basically 50% of the country thinking one thing and 50% of the country thinking another thing, and that's okay. That's, higher education. And for those who are alumni of different schools, it's a wonderful place for people to reconnect and feel some sense of saneness and stability, and being seen and being heard. And I think, I reflect upon my own experience, which was transformative, faculty members going above and beyond in a highly relational environment. I think so many of us that are in this space know that to be true in our own experience. We see it with our students on campus today, and it provides a really unique opportunity, even of a time where there's dissidence and chaos. It provides an incredible opportunity. The second thing I just wanted to say is you're 100% correct. And I think about the tension all the time. When I look at our donor pyramid, our gift table, probably 1% of the donors are accounting for something like 95.5% of the total in our campaign. That's not a sustainable model. And that's one of those things that I continue to feel concerned about. The constructs that we have in higher education and the financial model in higher education, unless you're one of the Ivies or the Ivy adjacent schools, it places tremendous pressure on principal gifts, and probably more so even on tuition, and that's just kind of the reality of where we're at. And we have to continue to make the infrastructure investment to invite more people into the conversation.
Well, that could be a good segue as we move toward wrapping the conversation. I asked you what you think might be a next step forward for the industry. You said embracing AI to free gift officers to focus energy on donor-facing work. I obviously feel strongly that will be the case, and I think there's this question/opportunity of, can we sort of automate a lot of the low value, time intensive tasks and free people up to do what we're doing right now? And I think the answer is yes. Tell me more about your journey on that topic.
Yeah, well, we are still kind of getting our arms around all of the opportunities that AI can provide. The one thing that I know to be true, the technology is moving faster and faster and faster. It's continuing to improve in sophistication. I still feel strongly that the highest value thing that we do in advancement is centered on relationships. And I think, Brent, when I look at, exactly to your point, the work that I did with Walter Crowe, and by the way, Brent, I have like an odd recall. I can tell you most of the donors who I have visited with over the last 26, 27 years, which is my colleagues think is a little odd, but that's kind of how I'm wired, I guess. But that stuff can't be repeated or can't be replicated, excuse me, through AI. The individual work of the person in the thinking about impact, dreaming together, And I think with an advancement, a lot of what we do is sequencing the conversations in such a way that the right people are in the room and at the right time. So whether it's a dean, a faculty member, it's a student, it's the president, a board member, these are all things that as we learn more in the AI space and use that in more effective ways, it frees us up to do the things that are the highest value.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I think we've seen this play out in other in other technology waves. I suspect it will be similar, but there was a moment when people thought that by being able to do email marketing, you would magically solve all the problems because now you could email everybody at once and you could personalize it with their name. But then guess what? Everybody else does that. The inbox gets overwhelmed, and now an actual human to human email stands out because there's
Right.
so much noise, right? And I think that there's going to be a whole new wave of AI-driven automation that will fake personalization. And I think there will be an element where it can elevate personalization, but
Mhm.
in the end, rubber is going to hit the road on the human-to-human connection becoming more valuable because it's going to become more rare as there are more automated alternatives. And I think that's where I'm hopeful that we can accelerate and elevate the personalization, but really free up more time for the human-to-human connection.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think there's opportunities that when we look at investment, there's probably things that are back office and orientation that AI will be able to account for. That would allow us to release resources to be more, if you will, donor or constituent facing.
Absolutely agree. Tell me about, outside of work. I mean, you've been so involved philanthropically, but you've also found ways to volunteer and engage in philanthropy, as a volunteer as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, in Northern California, I was able to serve as a board member of the Catholic Charities of San Mateo, San Francisco, and Marin counties. An incredibly rewarding experience. And to be honest, how I prepared for board meetings after being a board member and what I found to be worthwhile and not worthwhile, it opened my eyes quite a bit. I think I became a better advancement person by virtue of having to sit through some meetings that were pretty good and some that maybe could have been a little better. But I working in San Francisco, and sometimes San Francisco will get a rap, and I don't think it's completely fair because I could probably go to any city and find the same things. But working with those who didn't have an advocate and a voice, which is a lot of what Catholic Charities does. It's 40 agencies and working with, women, children, the poor, immigrants, you name it. And it was an incredibly rewarding experience. I chaired the programs committee there and was a member of the executive committee. Really edifying all the way around. It aligned well with my values, and it gave me a chance to actually make some philanthropic gifts and to be on the other end as a philanthropist, which I really found to be rewarding and energizing. Yeah, so I mean that one of the things I've done outside of work. I mean, Brent, the other thing is I have four kids who are now almost all adult kids. So, ranging from age 32 to age 23, and they still consume a bit of my time because I'm all about, youngest of nine kids, also dad of four. So that's kind of, a few of my defining elements of who I am as a person. And everyone here knows I'm from Iowa, Brent. So you'd be very happy to know that because I
What
lead with
is it
that.
about us? We can't stop talking about it. Not, I say that to my wife all the time. I say, we don't, when we meet people, they don't always lead with where they grew up, but we always do. I don't know why.
Yeah, the president at LMU says, Peter kind of has the thing that people who went to Harvard go, that people who go to Harvard or went to Harvard might have, which is you'll know within about 2 minutes that he's the youngest of nine kids and he's from Iowa, in the same way that maybe those who went to Harvard kind of share that. So,
Love it. I love it. Well, tell me just as we conclude, if people want to be in touch, are you hiring? What should folks be thinking about in the context of Loyola Marymount advancement?
yeah, we are hiring. We've done a great job of building out a major gift team. We still have a few spots there that we're finalizing in getting hired. But our real growth area right now is going to be centered a little bit more on our annual giving effort and what I'd see as pipeline. We're doing a lot of work on the alumni team right now. We've got a really good team, a couple positions left to hire there. But I think the big thing about Loyola Marymount and what I try to bring in as a leader is we're going to give you a chance to lean into some of the, I'll say big questions that we need to answer organizationally and structurally. when we think about our engagement, our pipeline efforts externally, and the expectation that I would have for those who come in and work really closely with me and with others on the team is that you're going to come in curious, you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to have an opportunity to grow as a person and professionally. We've got a great track record of growing our own team. And I'm really excited just from a legacy standpoint. I've got so many folks that I've worked with in the past that are often doing great things. And that's a big part of, I think of who's mentored me and what it's meant to me, and we try to pay it forward. But yeah, we have some opportunities at LMU. If you want to get in touch with me, obviously, my name is just put a period between Peter and Wilch and add at lmu.edu, and that's how you can find me. So.
Peter's also active on LinkedIn, and I just want to say thank you. It's been probably a decade or so since we first connected on this journey, and just continue to be inspired by your just genuine enthusiasm and motivation to do good work in the sector. And I would encourage anybody listening to reach out to Peter, let him know that you heard him on the Raise podcast, and just want to say thank you.
Thanks so much, Brent. Great to be with you today.
All right, with that, I'll conclude today's episode featuring Peter Wilch, who serves as Senior Vice President for University Advancement at Loyola Marymount University. Thank you, Peter, and take care, everybody.